Hey guys, today I'll show you a supernatural horror TV series named Sleepy Hollow Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins on the field of the Revolutionary War, where Captain Crane demonstrated his bravery. Despite his serious injuries, he managed to behead an enemy officer who wore a mask. Unfortunately, due to the severity of his injuries, he fell to his death. Time passed quickly, and after an indeterminate number of years, Crane awoke from his grave. Judging by the objects surrounding him, it appeared he was resurrected by some kind of dark magic. With a frail body, he crawled out of his grave and made his way to a modern highway. The asphalt beneath his feet and the speeding cars were all alien to him. Seeing strangely dressed individuals alighting from the vehicles, Crane fled for his shitty life to a nearby town. A signpost indicated this was the town of Sleepy Hollow. Somewhere in the town, the female officer Abby and her partner Corbin were dining, and not far from them, a priest seemed to be watching them. From their conversation, it was clear that Abby was currently busy preparing for the FBI entrance exam. News from the police station came in about an unusual situation at a nearby stable, and the two rushed to the scene. Upon arrival, Corbin discovered that the horses seemed to be greatly frightened. Abby found a repeating rifle dropped beside an unattended truck, and not far from there, the farm owner was beheaded. Inside the stable, Corbin encountered the Headless Horseman. Bullets had no effect on him, and sadly, Corbin was beheaded. The barn doors flung open, and the Headless Horseman, holding an axe imbued with hellfire, sped off. Upon receiving the distress message, Officer Andy, who was on patrol, turned around to provide backup, barely missing Crane, who was crossing like a headless fly. Later, upon seeing Crane, Abby was certain that the man was not the one who murdered her partner. However, Crane was taken into custody as a murder suspect. When Abby mentioned that the perpetrator wielded a battle axe, Crane suggested that there should be a mark of a bow and arrow on the perpetrator's hand, which piqued Abby's interest. Later, Crane was brought to the interrogation room for a lie detector test. He introduced himself as a former history professor at Oxford University who was dispatched to the American colonies to join the war against the Patriots. He then defected and, under the command of George Washington, became a spy. It was he who beheaded the Headless Horseman on the battlefield. He recalled being taken to a battlefield medical station after being injured, where his wife, who is a witch, tended to his wounds. After that, he lost consciousness until he woke up in the grave today. After hearing this, the medical examiner showed Crane a banknote, informing him that it's been over 250 years since the Revolutionary War. The scene shifts to the inspector arranging for Crane to be sent to a mental hospital. Abby approached the inspector requesting to personally interrogate Crane. Although she found Crane's claims hard to believe, she learned from the coroner that only a small amount of blood seeped from Corbin's body, indicating that the axe used by the killer was heated to at least 500 degrees. This raised some questions. Considering that Abby had just lost her partner, the inspector agreed to her request. Upon meeting Crane, Abby decided to take him to the grave to verify his claims. She coaxed and scared Crane into a police car, officially opening the door to the new world for him. On the way, everything Crane saw was new to him. Initially, he was fascinated with the car window's rolling glass. Then he was curious about the legality of having coffee shops everywhere. As they passed a church, Crane and the priest locked eyes, recognizing each other. Arriving at the cave where the grave was located, Crane found a Bible, the same one used by the priest when he was being treated after he got injured. In it, a passage from Revelation about the Horseman of Death was marked. The Horseman of Death is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, with the other 3 being famine, war, and plague. Seeing Abby's disbelief, Crane began to recount the events of the battlefield hundreds of years ago. At that time, the Redcoats ambushed them in the Hudson Valley. Due to the dire situation, Washington secretly assigned Crane a mission to kill a man who would appear on the Hudson coast. This man had a bow and arrow brand on his hand. However, Abby laughed off Crane's story, refusing to believe that the Grim Reaper himself killed her partner. Crane insisted that he had clearly beheaded the man on the battlefield, yet he did not die. This was enough to suggest that they were dealing with a supernatural entity. Now that the Horseman of Death, namely the apocalyptic rider of death, had returned to Sleepy Hollow, he was continuing his mission. In the middle of the night, the priest arrives at the church's graveyard, where the Headless Horseman makes an appearance to flex his headless body. It seems that this priest is not an easy opponent, capable of manipulating objects through spells. However, in front of the fierce combat power of the Headless Horseman, these spells are useless. The priest is quickly killed. Afterward, Abby and Crane arrive at the church, where police are investigating the murder scene. A hawk lands on the car's hood, seemingly guiding Crane to follow it. Abby discovers that the priest's wounds also have burn marks, consistent with the modus operandi at the farm crime scene. The inspector is irritated by seeing Crane wandering around, but he is told by Abby that Crane is their only clue at the moment. Yet the inspector orders Crane to be admitted to a mental hospital immediately, or Abby will be suspended from duty. Andy approaches her, advising Abby to step back from the investigation. Following the hawk, Crane finds a tombstone. The name on it suggests it's his wife's final resting place. The epitaph suggests she was burned to death for practicing witchcraft. Knowing this, Crane needs Abby's help more than ever to uncover the truth. He urges Abby not to leave Sleepy Hollow Town because, for some mysterious reason, their destinies are now intertwined. Abby says she can't face the unexplainable events alone again. Crane, sensing a deeper meaning in her words, realizes that Abby has had a strange encounter in the past that made her question her perception of reality. Crane is committed to a mental ward. Once alone, Abby tells him that during high school, she and her sister were walking through the forest one night when they suddenly saw 4 white trees that felt very strange. Then they heard a terrifying noise. Their vision was so blurred they couldn't distinguish if it was a person or something else in the distance. They passed out and were found by the roadside. The incident made her sister go mad, and she frequently goes in and out of jail. It's due to Abby's past experiences that she can understand Crane when everyone else thinks he's insane. The next morning, Abby returns to her office to pack up her things. Accidentally, she finds a key behind a photo she shares with Corbin. She tries it on the police station's file safe and discovers a box of Corbin's tape recordings. The tapes reveal that from 1712 to 1816, a total of 100 witches were sentenced to death in Sleepy Hollow. The town records show that members of 2 major witch groups changed their names and disguised themselves as ordinary citizens to escape this fate. These 2 groups represented good and evil. The investigation found that hundreds of unsolved cases, including murders and disappearances, were being ignored by the authorities. Sleepy Hollow was not the only place where these cases occurred. Similar cases were found in Boston and Washington, suggesting a special connection between them, though this is not yet known. The files also recorded an unusual discovery from Abby's childhood, which matched a local farmer's description from 1882. The farmer, too, claimed to have witnessed the same scene at the same location. He believed this was a sign of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and that the devil was sent to resurrect them. Suddenly, the inspector appears, forcing Abby to leave, but not before secretly taking a map. Crane is awakened by the hawk and sees his wife in the mirror on the wall. She tells him that her body is not in the grave he saw earlier, but is hidden with the Headless Horseman's skull and guarded by a member of a witch group, likely the deceased priest. They are members of an ancient knightly order dedicated to combating the dark forces in Sleepy Hollow. It turns out, when Crane injured the Headless Horseman hundreds of years ago, their blood merged, thus linking their fates. The only way to stop the Headless Horseman from wreaking havoc is to curse them both at the same time. So they buried the Headless Horseman deep in the river and protected Crane in a cave. But now, with the Headless Horseman awakened, Crane is also awakened. The one who woke them is the devil who trapped himself there and controls the Headless Horseman. Suddenly, they hear a roar from deep within the forest. His wife quickly tells him that if the Headless Horseman recovers his skull, he will regain his full power, and the other 3 horsemen will soon follow. This would bring about the real end of the world. The urgent task, then, is for Crane to prevent the Headless Horseman from finding his skull. She knew light is his weakness. After sunrise, the Headless Horseman cannot survive. If he is successfully stopped, Crane will also be freed from the devil's control. All the answers lie in the Bible, in Washington. Crane is the first witness. Then the wife disappears and Crane awakens from his dream, only to find himself bound by 2 strong men, a doctor preparing to inject him with a drug. Officer Abby arrives just in time, using a fake court summons to get Crane out of the mental hospital. On the road, she explained to Crane what she discovered at the police station. It turns out what she had taken secretly was a map of the Hudson Valley, drawn in 1776, and the person who drew it was none other than George Washington. Abby had marked suspicious locations around the town. Crane was curious as to why this map was in her hands, and told Abby that everything she saw as a child was real, as he too had seen 4 white trees and the strange demon. Abby quickly contacted Officer Andy, asking him to gather people at the church. At this time, Andy had just returned home to find the door lock had been picked. Upon entering, he saw the gun safe wide open and the Headless Horseman, fully armed, stand up from the sofa. Surprisingly, Andy didn't panic, but calmly stated that he knew where Crane was. Following the map's directions, Crane and Abby found the Headless Horseman's skull in the church cemetery. The Horseman, dressed in old military gear and armed with a submachine gun, showed up to flex his headless body again. He was unexpectedly skilled with the modern weapon, handling it with the proficiency of a seasoned veteran, despite no eyes for him to aim the gun at his targets. Just when he was about to win, Abby fired from the darkness, buying Crane a chance to strike back. Andy drove up, and Abby was puzzled as to why he was alone. As Andy tried to take a gun, he knocked Abby unconscious. From their conversation, it was clear that Andy knew about the Headless Horseman all along. Abby bit his hormone-let-go finger and grabbed a gun. At this point, Crane was nearly overwhelmed. Reinforcements arrived, and the Headless Horseman started to fire without talking any nonsense because he had no mouth to speak. Luckily, the sun rose, and the horseman rode away on his Ferrari horse like a headless fly, leaving them with the skull. Because they had physical evidence and eyewitnesses, the inspector had no choice but to give Abby and her team some leeway, while also commanding them to uncover the truth. Abby flatly refused when she learned that she was being transferred to FBI training next Wednesday. There were too many mysteries here that she needed to unravel. After the inspector left, Crane told Abby that he was the first witness, but the Bible mentions 2 witnesses who endured 7 years of tribulation together to protect people from the power of hell. He believed the said 2 witnesses were none other than Abby and himself. To gather more clues, they planned to find Andy, but the devil arrived first and killed Andy. When they arrived, all they saw was a blurry figure with a goat's head and human body in the mirror, slowly walking away. After the 2 prevented the resurrection of the Headless Horseman, the scene shifts to Crane having another dream, where he was chased by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and had to flee into the thicket. At a dead end, he was pulled underground by vines. In the cave, he saw his wife again. She told Crane that there was a more important task for him to complete. Before the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse descended to the world, only the army of evil could pave the way for those horsemen. When the blood moon rose, the first evil spirit would arise, and she was one of those soldiers in the army of evil. Crane had to stop her before she killed people. He was still confused before his wife disappeared. Then the strange demon appeared at the cave entrance and pulled Crane back to reality. As the most recent witness to a death case, Crane was temporarily restricted in his personal freedom. The case of Abby's partner, Corbin's death, remained a mystery. The police could not accept that he was killed by the Headless Horseman. 2 eyewitness police officers retracted their statements, leaving Abby even more isolated at the police station. She claimed that Officer Andy was killed by someone or something without anyone noticing. A series of strange events caused panic in the town. To convince Abby to believe in science, the inspector showed her the surveillance video from the jail, which showed Andy killing himself by running into a wall. But Abby knew what she saw in the mirror and claimed that Crane saw the same image and could testify for her. But the inspector believed Crane was a typical delusional schizophrenic, and his words were not credible. The inspector needed to leave Sleepy Hollow to collect information in other cities. He hoped that Abby would sort out her thoughts while he was away and not cause him any embarrassment. Abby found Crane, who told her about his dream with his wife the night before. While the Headless Horseman seemed to have disappeared, they couldn't let their guard down because a new threat, an evil spirit, was coming. Prompted by the inspector's words, Abby began to question what she and Crane had seen and heard. After all, they weren't even sure what they were up against. For her, the most crucial thing at the moment was to maintain her sanity and keep her job. Crane, on the other hand, believed that faith was reason. If everything his wife said was true, then it meant that the first evil spirit had already arrived in Sleepy Hollow. They had to be prepared at all times. Suddenly in the morgue, a body bag began to move violently. Andy, who was supposed to be dead, came back to life with his head twisted backward. The demon appeared, chanted a spell, and restored Andy's head to its usual position. From his mouth, he spit out a necklace with a peculiar emblem. In the car, Crane was telling Abby about his romantic history with his wife. He was surprised to find out that the breakfast they just had cost nearly $5. He considered this robbery compared to the past. Abby wasn't distracted and kept pressing him about his wife. As for why Crane didn't know his wife was a witch, Crane explained that witch trials were not as common when he met his wife, but they had taken many women's lives. So he believed his wife hid her identity to protect them both. Broadly speaking, she was protecting the nation from a great disaster. Abby thought this was crazy, but Crane, who felt he was just robbed by the restaurant, thought a 10% food tax was the true madness. He suggested that they should organize a public protest. Abby advised Crane not to talk about witches or express anger over donut taxes if he didn't want to be sent back to a mental hospital. They needed to set up a fake identity for Crane. After his resurrection, Andy acquired a police car and set out to accomplish the task given by the demon. At the funeral of her dead partner, Abby couldn't help but tear up as she remembered Corbin's voice, laughter, and the circumstances of his death. Crane visited his wife's gravestone, wanting to understand what she was trying to tell him. There were too many mysteries he couldn't explain. Suddenly, he remembered his wife's words. If the evil spirit was a member of his wife's group, it must also be a witch. Andy arrived at the ruins of the old town in Sleepy Hollow, placing an emblem atop a stone pillar. As flames erupted, a witch appeared, her body covered in burns. Andy delivered the magic from the demon to resurrect her immediately. Later, a man was stopped by a police car. The officer stepping out was none other than Andy. After asking the man for his name and discovering his surname, Andy left a cryptic remark and drove away. After Andy's departure, the man tried to start his car but failed, no matter how hard he tried. Then, unclear noises echoed from the radio, and a thick fog began to envelop the road. Suddenly, the resurrected witch jumped onto the hood of the car, placing her hand on the windshield, and the car burst into flames. Back at the police station, Crane was explaining to Abby how witches draw power from the moon. Abby, already shaken, clearly wasn't absorbing his words. Crane understood her struggle and empathized with her, admitting that he too was unaware of the whole truth and that her hesitation was normal. After a discussion, it turned out that Abby wasn't doubting herself but was concerned about standing out too much in society. The police wouldn't buy into supernatural stories. Upon analysis, Crane believed that the death of her partner had significantly impacted Abby. Officer Corbin was likely the only person who believed Abby's childhood sighting of the white tree and the demon. Abby shared that her sister was sent to a mental hospital, and she had been trying hard to forget about that day. She even once broke into a pharmacy with her boyfriend to steal anesthetics. When they were caught by the police, her boyfriend abandoned her and ran. The officer who arrived was her future partner, Corbin. At a moment of despair, Corbin didn't arrest her but bought her a dessert. Those few minutes imparted her with a lifetime's worth of truth. An emergency message from a colleague brought them to a scene where a burnt-out car was found. Inside it was the charred body of the victim, Jeremy. Crane noticed a large hole in his chest. There was no dust scattering around the hole, as if someone had been collecting something. Looking at the situation, he guessed who the murderer was. It turned out that the night before the Revolutionary War started, under a blood-red moon, Crane and his squad were out on a mission. When they returned, they found the camp attacked, the devastation far beyond what ordinary cannon fire could cause. Burnt bodies were everywhere. He felt a malevolent spirit lurking in the surrounding woods. The sight of the witch made his blood run cold. Later, these strange murderers appeared more frequently, and rumors spread about an evil witch group led by a high priestess, a hellish Rakshasi. Washington believed that this witch group had formed an alliance with the Headless Horseman. This aligned with the clue left in the cassette tape by Officer Corbin, who believed that two powerful witch forces representing good and evil existed in Sleepy Hollow. So they should be able to find clues from Corbin's files. Returning once more to Corbin's office, they found it had been tidied up, with all the files removed. At that moment, Officer Luke walked over, his demeanor uninviting towards Crane. Luckily, Abby arrived just in time, informing Luke that Crane was a safety consultant appointed by their superior, thus diffusing the awkwardness. Abby discovered that the files had been moved to the archive room and required a permit to access them, and currently, they couldn't make contact with the inspector. Crane said he knew the place used to be an armory, and that there was another route that led directly to its basement. They found a wall where the entrance to the passage had once been. Crane knew it was time to sweat a little. Picking up a fire axe, he started to break through the brick wall, revealing a tunnel behind. During the Independence War, several secret tunnels had been built under the town to transport arms and supplies. The one they were in now led directly to the building where the archive room was located. Along the way, they saw many skeletons. Crane explained that at the end of the tunnel lay the buried witches executed in the past. By law of that time, witches were not entitled to regular funerals, much like his own wife. Even though they had found her tombstone, they still didn't know where her body was. Inside the tunnel, they even found explosives hidden from the war era. Climbing a ladder, the duo finally entered the archive room and found the files. Meanwhile, a few boys were kicking a soccer ball around, and Andy appeared again. He asked one of the boys his name, and upon confirming his name, Andy looked relieved. Crane made a discovery through the files. The records showed that a hellish female Rakshasi had been sealed by a benevolent witch group called Sisterhood of the Radiant Heart. Their leader used white magic to weaken the Rakshasi's power and then ordered the hunters to capture her in the woods near Sleepy Hollow. She was captured later and put under a trial. Before her execution, the Rakshasi recited a curse that when the blood moon rose, their ancestors' ashes would belong to her, their flesh would be hers, and she would be reborn. Now, Crane realized the first evil spirit mentioned by his wife in his dream was the Rakshasi. Abby asked who the judge for the trial was at that time. It turned out that Jeremy, the victim in the car accident, was a descendant of the judge, and tonight was the blood moon. So they had to act quickly to prevent the witch from finding her next target in order to stop her rebirth. Officer Abby knew about the locals and immediately drove with Crane to the house of the little boy who had been confirmed by Andy for his next target. Late at night, the boy was woken up by a cat and left his room to look for his mother. A scream startled his mother, who was taking a bath. She rushed over but found no sign of her son. When Crane and Abby arrived, the scared boy said he saw a woman who seemed to be on fire. His mother thought he was just having a nightmare. Crane noticed something had been taken from the bookshelf. The mother said it was her husband's ashes. It turned out that the boy was adopted, and her husband was the last of the family who was involved in capturing the Rakshasi. That explains why the little boy was left unharmed. Crane believed that if they could find the Rakshasi's bones and burn them to ashes before the blood moon, they could eliminate her. They thought of the tunnel where the Rakshasi's body was likely buried with the other witches. By now, Andy had located the bag containing the Rakshasi's bones. Crane and his team searched around but found that the bones had been taken. Right then, the resurrected witch started her resurrection ritual. As the incantation was recited, she lay flat on the ground, and the burn marks all over her body rapidly faded. She was nearly resurrected to be the Rakshasi. Crane fired his gun, but the bullets were useless. They then thought of using gunpowder. The Rakshasi arrived, telling Crane that his wife was the leader of the White Witches and was now trapped between life and death. They quickly hid, preparing to ignite the explosives with a torch, but the thrown torch extinguished. Just then, a chant sounded, reigniting the torch and causing a violent explosion. The Rakshasi was sent back to hell once more before she was fully reborn. Back at the police station, Crane decided to find this so-called between worlds to rescue his wife. After all they had been through, Abby finally acknowledged the existence of monsters and demons. She entered her partner's office and found Corbin there. Unfazed by the supernatural, she didn't panic, but rather said the world had become a living hell, asking for his help again. Corbin philosophically stated that only she herself could answer that question. Crane walked over with coffee, but in his view, the table in front of him was empty. In the mental hospital, a young girl was exercising. A nurse came in calling her name. It was Abby's sister, Jenny. When asked about her recent condition, Jenny said she hadn't had any hallucinations since she started taking the pills, but after the nurse left, she spit them out. The lights flickered, and the shadow of a demon appeared behind Jenny. The scene shifts to Abby being plunged into a chaotic dream. In the dream, everyone points their finger at her. Even a sleep demon appears to flex his pale, terrifying face, causing her to wake up abruptly. The dispatcher sends a message for her to immediately arrive at the scene. The inspector says their forensic psychologist is prepared to jump off a building and wants to talk only with Abby. The woman looks as if she's sleepwalking, muttering that everything Jenny saw was real, and she believes her but had lied to her. Abby recognizes her as the same woman from her dream. The psychologist jumps off the building after speaking. Abby says her eyes looked as if they were covered in white snow, but the coroner thinks it's severe cataracts. Unexpectedly, smoke comes from the psychologist's eyes, and her eyeballs are instantly burned to ashes. Abby tells the inspector that the psychologist mentioned her sister Jenny and must have contacted her through Jenny. The inspector says the psychologist was also a resident doctor at the mental hospital and asks Abby and Crane to quickly uncover the truth. Abby tells Crane that not only did she see the faceless sleep demon in her dream, but the psychologist she just met for the first time also appeared. Crane thinks Abby's dream might be warning about future events. After all, the Bible of Washington prophesied 2 witnesses. But Abby believes that since they can't confirm if this is another demonic meddling, they might as well start with regular detective work. They began to review the psychologist's treatment records and discovered that she had started to believe that Jenny wasn't lying. It was likely due to guilt that she ultimately chose suicide. Crane reminded Abby that this didn't explain why the psychologist's eyes had turned white. The whole event might be related to the vanguard of the demons sent to clear the way for those horsemen before they descended to the world. He believed the sleep demon was another soldier of the army of evil and viewed both Abby and her sister as threats. They rushed to the mental hospital, but Jenny refused to meet with her sister. It seemed the two sisters' relationship was not harmonious. With no other option, Crane suggested he should meet with Jenny first. Upon meeting Jenny, Crane got straight to the point, stating that he too had seen the strange demon in the forest. Jenny urged him to be careful with his words, stating that she was locked up here because she told the truth, while Abby, who lied, was free to live her life. This is likely why she resented her sister. Crane informed Jenny that her primary psychologist had ended her life the previous night. The Headless Horseman had arrived in town and had killed the priest and Officer Corbin. This proved that Jenny was not mentally ill. Crane hoped she could help them fight against the demons, but the rift between the sisters was too deep. Jenny did not agree to Crane's request. In order to gather all forces to stop the sleep demon, Crane went to Abby, wanting to understand the reason for their sisterly rift and hoping to resolve their conflicts. Under his questioning, Abby began to tell the past. After the sisters were found unconscious, the police asked what had happened. Jenny truthfully told them about the strange phenomena they had witnessed, but Abby, out of fear, said she had not seen anything. This led to Jenny being treated as a liar and kicked out of their foster home. Crane urged Abby to temporarily let go of the guilt. Jenny had already told the psychologist that aside from Abby, the only other person who witnessed the strange phenomena was the farmer who found them, and he had chosen to remain silent. The best course of action now would be to locate the farmer to avoid another tragedy. Meanwhile, the bald farmer in the farm slept deeply, snoring like a pig. After waking up, he accidentally got scratched by a nail. When he wiped the wound with a cloth, the blood surprisingly imprinted a mysterious symbol. In the tool room, the sleep demon appeared. Back at the police station, Officer Luke met with the inspector. From their conversation, it was revealed that he had been Abby's boyfriend, which explained why he was not friendly towards Crane. Upon hearing a report of unidentified gunshots, the inspector rushed to the farm. Strangely, the farmer only wanted to talk to Abby. Abby entered the room, only to see the same sleepwalking state and white eyes of the farmer. Seeing the sleep demon behind Abby, the bald farmer carelessly fired his bald gun. Hearing the gunshot, the inspector prepared to send in a tactical team, but at Abby's suggestion, he did not act immediately. The farmer warned Abby that the next time she slept, it would be her death. He then shot himself to end his bald life. Having witnessed the deaths of the psychologist and the farmer, Abby finally accepted the reality that their indifference led to her sister's tragic fate. The two returned to the archive room where they discovered through their research that the dream sprite had existed since ancient times. Like humans, they had both good and bad among them. Seeing the symbol in the book, Crane recalled a story told by his comrade from the Legion. That symbol represented the Sandman, who had black, empty eye sockets and a mouth covered by skin. His comrade was a Mohawk, a member of the local indigenous people. A legend had always been circulating in their tribe. It roughly meant that you must treat your neighbors well, otherwise the spirit of the Sandman would enter your dreams and wreak havoc. The locals would draw the symbol from the book to ward off the Sandman. The comrade said his own father had been killed by the Sandman as a warning due to his indifference towards the difficulties of his neighbors. Since Abby did not share the Mohawk people's beliefs, even if she drew the symbol, it would not have the effect of warding off the Sandman. In order to save Abby, they decided to seek the help of a Mohawk shaman. To his surprise, Abby actually took him to a used car market where they met the shaman dressed in a suit. Though at first the shaman was very resistant to fighting against the evil spirit, a citing of scriptures by Crane finally convinced him to offer his help. They arrived at a secluded location where the shaman told them the Sandman would not simply kill his victims, who turned a blind eye to justice, but would use their wrongdoings to provoke them, pushing them to the point where they willingly ended their own lives. The shaman made Abby drink a cup of potion, which was said to send a person into the demon's dream world. Because Crane was worried about leaving Abby alone, he also drank the potion to enter the dream world. The shaman had people use scorpions to sting their abdomens, saying the venom could protect their minds. In the dream, Abby first encountered the Sandman. Sand flowed out of the Sandman's eye sockets and splashed onto Abby's face. In reality, her eyes turned white. Abby pulled out her gun and fired back, but the Sandman's body seemed to be just a shadow, with all the bullets hitting the tree behind him. Then, the Sandman turned into a whirl of quicksand, engulfing Abby into the scene of the year when she and her sister were interrogated. Through a red wooden door that suddenly appeared, Crane entered a corridor where the bodies of the psychologist and the bald farmer were hanging, and even a rope was left for him. In the interrogation room, because Abby kept silent, the police determined that Jenny had mental problems and dragged her away. In front of a guilt-ridden Abby, the Sandman's slender, ghostly claws extended. Crane rushed over to try to stop it, but such a demon was not so easily persuaded. With just a slight wave of his hand, Crane's arm in the dream turned into sand. Just as he was about to further harm Crane, Abby spoke to stop him. She finally spoke about what she saw on the day of the incident, facing her mistakes squarely. The Sandman turned into glass at the sound of her confession and was shattered by Abby with a stool. The two returned to reality, resting in the archive room. The inspector walked in and found them. It turned out that the two had been secretly using the secret passage without official permission. Perhaps seeing their work abilities, the inspector was no longer as aloof as before and agreed to their continued use of this room. Encouraged by Crane, Abby decided to visit her sister Jenny. She came to the mental hospital and found that her sister had already escaped through the ceiling. The scene shifts to 1773, when under the gloom of war, the port of Boston was teeming with rioters damaging piles of tea leaves. A small troop secretly landed ashore, seemingly in search of a lost ancient artifact, but they met fierce resistance and failed to complete their mission. Back to modern times. As Jenny has escaped from the mental hospital, the inspector is ready to deploy a large force to hunt her down. Abby pleads desperately, and with Crane's seemingly insightful analysis of the local security situation, the inspector agrees to give them half a day to find her independently. Jenny arrives at a bar, retrieves a backpack she had stored there, and then disappears. In a household nearby, a muscular man is instructing his son to practice the piano. In the middle of the lesson, he receives a phone call indicating that they've found a lead on something they've been looking for, and a cleanup crew will be dispatched to assist him in completing the task. By dawn, the muscular man arrives at the bar Jenny visited, demanding to know the whereabouts of Jenny's backpack from the bartender. Seeing no useful information forthcoming, the muscular man subjects the poor bartender to brutal punishment. Back at the police station, Crane is reviewing Jenny's records and finds that aside from her time in prison and mental hospitals, she's been traveling the world, adopted by 7 different families, and stayed nearly a year with the last one. Perhaps they could find useful information there. A murder has occurred at the bar. The police find no evidence of robbery, but the horrific state of the bartender's body is alarming. The killer has beheaded him and hung the body on a hook. Recognizing the familiar method of execution, the inspector recalls the deceased Corbin and the priest. A report comes in that the bartender's wounds show no signs of burns, which brings the inspector some relief. Arriving at the last foster family where Jenny stayed, Abby learns from the foster mother about her sister's situation. Unexpectedly, it turns out that the woman didn't treat the adopted children well, but rather used government subsidies to purchase luxury items like sports cars. After some threats, the woman reveals that Jenny often ran off to a cabin by Trout Lake, where she seemed to have a friend. Upon reaching the lake, Abby skillfully opens a tightly closed gate, impressing Crane. Inside the cabin, they discover that the owner of the house is none other than Officer Corbin. From the photos on the table, it seems that he and Jenny had a close, secret relationship. Suddenly, Jenny walks in and the sisters aim their guns at each other. Just as it seems Jenny is about to pull the trigger, Crane diffuses the situation with a few well-chosen words, leaving the two emotional women speechless. After that, they finally sit down to have a proper conversation. Jenny reveals that she had been secretly collecting rare items and gathering information for Corbin. The night before Corbin was killed, they had met, and he had told her that if anything happened to him, she should return here, retrieve an important ancient artifact, and guard it well. It seemed that the muscular man was searching everywhere for the said artifact. Opening a hidden compartment in the wall, the trio discovers an old sextant used for navigation. Seeing the markings on it, Crane recalls that before the war began, they had received intelligence that the Redcoats had a deadly weapon that could turn the tide of the war. To verify if Crane really was an antique from the time of the Revolutionary War, Jenny throws a bunch of questions about the infantry at him. Crane answers them fluently. He also tells them that, according to legend, the weapon was hidden in Boston Harbor. In order to divert the attention of the local garrison, they even planned the famous Boston Tea Party. But their treasure hunt did not go smoothly because the weapon was guarded by the Hessian mercenaries, an evil organization and the notorious meat grinders on the battlefield. Seeing the enemy sneak attack, the guards did not hesitate to ignite the explosives. Crane was the only survivor, and he remembers that the surface of the box had the same markings as the sextant, suggesting a connection between the two. It turns out that the sextant is also a simple projector. The map inside shows old Sleepy Hollow, and it marks the location of the magic box. At this point, the muscular man arrives with his men. Amidst the chaos, an assassin snatches the sextant, but the muscular man himself is captured by the trio. Crane discovers a tattoo on his chest, the insignia of the Hessian mercenaries, exactly matching the mark of the Headless Horseman on the battlefield, which shows that the Headless Horseman is also a Hessian mercenary. It turns out the artifact box contained an entrance, a gateway to the 7th layer of hell, where 72 demon souls await their chance to enter the world. This is recorded in the Revelation. The gateway is the key of Solomon. The muscular man explains that for centuries, the Hessian mercenaries have been hidden in Sleepy Hollow. They are friendly neighbors in ordinary times, but they wouldn't hesitate to tear apart those around them when needed. Abby is puzzled. How does the muscular man know their names? He tells her that the demon in the mirror lives in her heart and has revealed the information to the Hessian mercenaries. Suddenly, he utters a phrase in an ancient language. Moloch will resurrect, then bites into a cyanide capsule and dies his muscular life. This indicates that the man and the Hessian mercenaries serve the demon Moloch, who is a godlike demon with the goal of bringing forward the apocalypse. His words leave Jenny feeling like she's surrounded by the demon's allies. Now they've lost the map, it seems impossible to stop the gates of hell from opening in time. But at the critical moment, Crane is able to recreate the map he saw only once, leaving Jenny completely bewildered. Elsewhere, 2 assassins arrive at an abandoned church, break open a wall, and retrieve a hidden stone box. Out of it, they take a large black book. Slashing their palms, they let their blood drop onto the book's pages. The previously blank paper slowly reveals text. As the incantations from the book are recited, flames burst from a stone basin, and the oil overflowing from it keeps expanding. Below the oil film, several demons seem ready to emerge. It turns out this is the deadly weapon that was supposed to turn the tide of the war in the eyes of the Redcoats. Crane and the sisters arrive, engaging in a fight with the 2 assassins. During the struggle, Jenny is taken hostage by one of the assassins, who demands Abby to return the magic book. Pretending to agree, Abby throws the book into the flames instead. The 2 assassins are swiftly taken down by Crane and Jenny. As the book burns to ashes, the oil quickly recedes and the flames are sucked back into the stone basin. Demons are prevented from entering the world, and peace is restored within the church in an instant. In the interrogation room, Abby removes the handcuffs from Jenny. She acknowledges her past mistakes and hopes to act as a limited guardian, allowing her sister freedom. She meets Crane in the hallway, who shares that he's been researching, and that Moloch, the strange demon the sisters encountered in the forest, is the leader of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and is now watching over his own wife. The scene shifts to the quiet woods, where a little boy dressed in period clothing is chased by a rider with a bow and arrow. A little girl suddenly appears, invites the boy to accompany her, then vanishes after a few steps. The boy is led to a road of the modern world, where the pursuing rider turns into ash and disappears with his Ferrari horse. While Abby is arranging a place to stay for Crane, she receives a notification that a little boy was found unconscious by the forest. The observant Crane notices that the boy's veins have turned black and that he is speaking a language used in the Middle Ages. Abby is puzzled that there is no information about the boy in the police database. The police conventionally refer to the boy as John Doe. The inspector arrives and says that the boy has been sent to the hospital. They suspect that the black veins may be a contagious disease. At the hospital, a disease control expert tells Abby that there are already infected individuals and there is currently no effective treatment for the disease. Through a camera, Crane makes contact with the boy in an ancient language. The boy says he comes from Roanoke, where people are forbidden to leave. Although Virginia has a place named Roanoke, Crane speculates based on the boy's language and old-fashioned clothing that the Roanoke the boy is referring to is not the current place, but the legendary Lost Colony. In the 1580s, Roanoke was an English colony in the New World, led by Governor John. His granddaughter was the first generation born in the American colonies. When John returned to England for supplies and came back, he found that the colony had been deserted. Crane speculates that this lost colony has now time-traveled to the vicinity of Sleepy Hollow. The inspector calls to say that the boy's condition is worsening and the disease is spreading rapidly. Medical staff are falling one after another. If this virus from 500 years ago spreads, the consequences will be disastrous. Crane and Abby go to the place where the boy was found, hoping to find an effective way to contain the virus. Crane, who comes from a noble family and has learned hunting skills since childhood, easily finds the boy's path. At the same time, they also discover a different set of small footprints. Strangely, the footprints disappear behind a large tree. The virus expert tells the inspector that there are foreign antibodies in the boy's body, which are slowing the spread of the virus, but he shows no sign of having been vaccinated. Deep in the woods, Crane and his companions discovered a small island in the lake deep within the forest. Following the markings on the trees, he quickly found a hidden path below the water surface. The two ventured onto the island and discovered the inhabitants there still maintained a way of life reminiscent of the Middle Ages. Though their veins were all black, there were no signs of illness. The manager explained that they indeed were the residents of Roanoke, who mysteriously disappeared hundreds of years ago due to a curse from the Plague Rider, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. At that time, everyone was infected by a mysterious plague, and the granddaughter of the governor was the first to die. After her death, her spirit guided them to this place. Ever since they settled here, their condition had not deteriorated. The missing little boy was one of these inhabitants, and his departure had spread the virus. If they could bring the boy back soon, all the infected people could be saved. Crane analyzed that the boy's successful escape was deliberately facilitated by the Plague Rider. If the plague ravaged Sleepy Hollow, the Plague Rider could join the Headless Horseman and form the army of evil. Seeing the figure of the rider in the distance, Abby knew it was time to leave. Back at the hospital, Crane discovered he too had been infected because he had no protection when he first came into contact with the boy. The disease was aggressive, and Crane quickly fell into a coma. Now Abby was left to fight alone. Without any clue, she decided to seek help in the hospital's chapel. The holy water gave her a revelation. She believed that the reason the people on the island were not sick might be because the water source there contained components that suppressed the virus. With the help of the inspector, Abby secretly moved Crane and the boy out of the hospital. But not long after they entered the forest, the Plague Rider caught up. After a mad dash for life, at the last moment, Crane, holding the boy, plunged into the spring. When they resurfaced, the black lines on their bodies disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Plague Rider once again turned into a gust of ash. A blinding white light flashed by, and the surrounding buildings and crowd disappeared. Looking at the figure gradually fading away in the dense fog in the distance, Crane thought about how these colonists had long been dead. The reason the boy could be seen by people was just because the Plague Rider needed a medium to spread the virus, and the boy was thus given a flesh and blood body. News came from the hospital that all the infected people had recovered without medication. Everyone believed this was the power of faith, but Crane knew clearly that when evil forces come again, they would need much more than just faith. In the stormy forest, the Headless Horseman once again emerged from the river, wielding a battle axe, and rushed through the fiery path. It's believed that the town of Sleepy Hollow will once again be stirred up by a bloody storm. The scene shifts to the baseball field where Abby is enthusiastic, sitting next to a dispirited Crane. He can't understand why the rule-abiding umpire is being cursed at. Abby, with her witty remarks, enlightens Crane about the fun of modern sports. Leaving the field, Crane walks alone to the cemetery and sits quietly in front of his wife's tombstone. Just before he faints from being hit by a tranquilizer dart, he sees an old man approaching him. On a mountain road, strange sounds come from the radio, and Abby's consciousness becomes blurry. In her hallucination, she finds herself in an old house. The Headless Horseman suddenly appears. In her panic, Abby hides in a room where she encounters Crane's wife, Katrina. Katrina tells her that the Headless Horseman she saw is an omen. As one of the witnesses, Abby has the power of foresight. The Headless Horseman will return to Sleepy Hollow after nightfall. To completely eliminate the apocalyptic rider of death, Crane must be killed first. To save Crane, Abby must find the Sin Eater as soon as possible. He will guide Abby to find and purify Crane's soul, severing the connection between Crane and the Headless Horseman. Back at the police station, Abby begins to talk about supernatural things with the inspector, but her voice is like a mosquito's buzz, making the inspector feel awkward. Out of pity, he agrees to give Jenny, who is still confined in the mental hospital, a day off to assist Abby in finding the Sin Eater. In the mental hospital, when Jenny hears the term Sin Eater from her sister, she becomes serious. Crane, who is unconscious, wakes up in a room full of candles. Seeing a man across from him, Crane instantly becomes Sherlock Holmes, analyzing the man's name, identity, and the goal of kidnapping him through various details. It turns out the man is a descendant of the youngest signer of the Declaration of Independence and, like Crane, a Freemason committed to preventing the arrival of the 4 apocalyptic horsemen and the destruction of the world. When the Freemason mentions the Order of Chaos, Crane begins to recount the past. When Crane first enlisted, he heard the same term from a freed slave named Arthur. At that time, he was a soldier in the British Army, and Arthur was accused of treason. Crane was ordered to arrest him, and it was during this mission that he first met his wife, Katrina. Katrina instantly recognized his kind nature, which shocked him greatly. After a mission escorting a hanging, Crane even saw his normally ruthless commander with the face of a demon. When Katrina heard about this, she was very sure that Crane was the legendary witness. Her words set Crane on the path to eradicate demons and protect the world. Meanwhile, Abby and her sister have made a new discovery in finding the Sin Eater. By comparing the information provided by Jenny, they found that a man has been frequently using aliases and appearing on death lists, presumably changing his identity in this way. They rush to his residence. Upon seeing the man, Abby gets straight to the point, stating that she knows his real name is Henry and she knows his true identity. She hopes that he can save Crane. The man looks very sorrowful. As a sin eater, his ability enables him to see the sins of all people, having to face the ugliest evil deeds and malicious thoughts in the world every day. Seeing his hesitation, the sisters quote passages from the Bible to inspire Henry's courage. Abby says her friend is now connected to the Headless Horseman, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and only the Sin Eater can purify the soul to save him. After much pleading, Henry only agrees to find Crane's location. As long as the bond between Abby and Crane is strong enough, he can find clues through telepathy. Guided by him, the sisters hurriedly arrive at a tunnel where they find the symbol of the Knights Templar. In the room, Crane continues to recount the past. After parting from Katrina, the commander ordered him to kill Arthur. It was then that he heard the term Order of Chaos. Although Crane decided to let Arthur go, the kind man didn't escape the commander's bullet. An enraged Crane begins to fight back, stabbing the commander in the chest, but the supposed-to-be dead commander was unharmed and revealed his demonic form, flinging Crane away with a palm strike. Luckily, cavalry passed by and the demon fled. Crane was rescued by Katrina. His detailed description wins the trust and respect of the Freemasons. The man then explained that his Freemason group had once allied with Katrina's coven of witches, but the alliance fell apart when the witches hid Crane without their consent. They came here to kidnap Crane this time, intending to kill him and then completely wipe out the Headless Horseman. As they prepare to act, Abby bursts in. However, Crane has already resolved to sacrifice himself, which greatly annoys Abby, who is desperate to save him. Regardless of Abby's pleas, Crane drinks the poison after bidding her farewell. Just as Crane starts to lose consciousness, the Sin Eater, Henry, arrives. He first pricks Crane's palm to draw a small amount of blood, then helps Crane summon the spirit of Arthur. Arthur advises Crane to accept his destiny as a witness, and the bond between him and the Headless Horseman will break itself. As the two of them recite their resolute words loudly, Crane seems to return to the battlefield. His diabetic blood, intertwined with that of the Headless Horseman, slowly separates. In reality, the Sin Eater dips his finger in the blood of the Headless Horseman that has separated on the table and swallows it without hesitation. From his expression, it's clear that this is no easy task. As time ticks by, tranquility once again envelops the room. Abby walks in to see the recovered Crane. Before they can even celebrate, Henry realizes that the sun has already set. The scene shifts to the woods, where the Headless Horseman has arrived at the cave where Crane was once buried. Just by grabbing a handful of soil, he perceives the image of Crane breaking out of the ground. It seems that the pursuit of his enemy and the witness is about to begin. The scene then shifts to Boston in the year 1755, when a group of horsemen rode from house to house, spreading news of the impending war. The Headless Horseman, with his head still intact, appeared to flex his handsome head and killed all of them. Back to the present, Crane looked at the mountain of household items and seriously thought that Abby had pillaged a nearby fortress. Learning that clean drinking water costs money, Crane laughed, commenting on the environmental destruction caused by this generation. Despite the Freemasons' claim that they have a method to restrain the Headless Horseman, Abby was displeased with their rule of no women allowed, so she ignored it. Back at the police station, Officer Luke was overly courteous to Abby, and neither of them noticed someone spying on them from a distance. As night fell, Luke encountered Andy, who had been out of sight for a long time on his way home. It seemed he was the one spying on Abby. The obvious signs of decay on his hands indicated that he was no longer human. Andy warned Luke to stay away from Abby, claiming that he was the one with the ability to protect her from the apocalypse. A war concerning the survival of humanity was unfolding. There were many others like him, waiting for the right moment. Abby received a voicemail from Crane. It turns out he went to the Freemasons' headquarters alone, hoping to persuade them to change their rules and allow Abby to join. However, when he entered, he found that everyone had been beheaded. When Abby arrived to join him, the Headless Horseman was seen outside the window, holding his spoils of war and riding away on his Ferrari horse. Despite the occurrence of a major murder, there was still no evidence proving that the murderer was the Headless Horseman. This put the inspector in a difficult position. He could only urge Abby and Crane to speed up their efforts to prevent another disaster. Crane was filled with guilt, believing that the deaths of these good people were his fault. Looking at the destroyed portrait of Washington on the wall, Crane realized the purpose of the Headless Horseman's visit was to retrieve his own missing head. The Freemasons had always been responsible for guarding the head, so the Horseman had come here to wreak havoc. Now the two of them must destroy it before the Headless Horseman gets hold of it. Otherwise, the other three horsemen would also descend. Since the Horseman's skull was now an important piece of evidence, they sought the help of the inspector. The inspector was flummoxed. He had just ordered Abby to gather more evidence, and now they wanted to destroy the little evidence they had. But seeing their serious expressions, he revealed that the skull had been sent to the lab. Crane hoped that he could take the opportunity to go there and secretly retrieve it. At the lab, the chemist reported that their research had made no progress. The inspector ordered the skull to be packed. He wanted to take it back to the station. At this moment, the Headless Horseman arrived, filled with killing intent. Still without saying a word, he killed the chemist and began shooting. Luckily, the inspector, who had dealt with criminals for years, was not an ordinary person. He used liquid nitrogen to trap the horseman and quickly left with the skull. However, common sense didn't seem to apply to such a monster. The car hadn't gone far when the figure of the horseman appeared in the rearview mirror. The reality was right in front of him, and the inspector finally completely believed Abby and Crane's words. Now, their task was to destroy the skull as soon as possible. Entering the tunnel, the two began to try various methods to destroy the artifact, but it was too resilient. Even a blast from a bomb left it unscathed. Out of options, they decided to try a hydraulic press. Walking down the street, Crane noticed 4 points of candlelight in a nearby garage. This reminded him of an alarm system developed by a bald scientist. Upon entering the garage's loft, they discovered the lanterns made from the heads of the Freemasons who had been murdered. The time flashed back to 1755 when the bald scientist and other Freemasons were safeguarding a safe house in Boston on the eve of an enemy's arrival. The bald scientist received a notebook rumored to contain the Freemasons' secrets, which could be used to defeat the enemy. Strangely, the notebook contained a heptagram, a symbol of magic. It seemed that the notebook likely contained methods for defeating evil spirits. This meant the Headless Horseman must have been nearby at the time. Crane and Abby reasoned that if the contents of the manuscript were updated after the horseman was beheaded, it could contain a method to completely destroy the skull. The pair visited the local museum, where Crane couldn't help but correct the guide's inaccurate explanation. Abby had to save the situation once again, apologizing and claiming her brother had forgotten his medication that morning. She informed Crane that the manuscript had been sent to London, but someone had uploaded it to the internet. While Crane was busy cracking the password, Abby received a message from Luke and went out to meet him. However, a terrified Luke had already decided to stay away from Abby. In the underground tunnel, Abby encountered Andy. It seemed courage really could be honed. Faced with Andy, clearly past his expiration date, Abby showed no fear and attacked him. Andy claimed he was trapped and everything he did was to protect Abby. Meanwhile, in the archives, Crane, lacking skills in internet usage, was in a flurry. As he boredly stared at the skull, he had an epiphany. He noticed the word Cicero written on the back of a tooth, which turned out to be the key. Back in the tunnel, Andy told Abby that the Headless Horseman couldn't be eliminated, saying that after all, they can't kill death. Crane, having found a method to counteract their enemy, approached. Since Andy was still in contact with the Horseman, Crane asked him to deliver a message. He wanted to meet the Horseman at the cemetery after nightfall. After Andy left, Crane told Abby that they needed to summon a witch to curse the Horseman, something they couldn't currently do. However, the clever Abby came up with an alternative. According to the manuscript, a witch had once created sunlight to subdue the Horseman. Modern technology could similarly simulate the effects of the sun. They sought help from the inspector. The inspector let loose, rambling on about everything from the founding fathers' independent thinking to tales of noblemen being cuckolded, much to Crane's annoyance. Night fell, and the Headless Horseman arrived at the cemetery. Crane used a dummy head to lure the enemy into the tunnel. The Horseman chased relentlessly, following the trail of decoy heads. They managed to trap the Horseman in an ambush. Upon closing the electric switch, several large, ultraviolet lights illuminated the dungeon like daylight. The Horseman screamed like a headless chicken and stopped moving as smoke rose from his body, allowing the shocking three to secure the monster with chains. The Inspector, Crane, and Abby managed to trap him underground. Although ultraviolet rays cannot kill the Horseman, the bunker, personally designed and built by Freemason leaders, is capable of confining him for some time. At the moment, Crane proposed interrogating the Horseman, hoping that this could provide clues to their next assault. Though the inspector was confident that a headless man couldn't speak, Abby thought of the demonized Andy. Perhaps a conversation between a horseman and a living person could be facilitated through the dead. Upon learning that their demon hunting team consisted of a dead man, a mentally ill patient, a time traveler from the Revolutionary period, and himself and Crane, the inspector felt overwhelmed. The scene switches to a forest where two hunters are hunting. When they see the horseman's white horse wandering alone in the woods, one of them calls others to gather and then kills his companion without hesitation. The mark on his hand shows that he is also a Hessian mercenary who served the demons. In the tunnel, Crane and Abby came to the place where they last saw Andy. There they found Andy's dwelling place, but Andy himself was not there, so they decided to wait for him. Meanwhile, Jenny was finally discharged from the hospital. The inspector plans to bring her to the police station, hoping she would join them to fight the four apocalyptic horsemen. Hearing that they had captured the Headless Horseman, a reluctant Jenny began to think seriously. When an officer reported that a jewelry store had been robbed, Jenny insisted on going with him. It's clear that she knows the store owner. In the tunnel, Crane found a stone tablet engraved with the symbol of the Egyptians communicating with the god of death. It turns out that Andy is the horseman's wizard, capable of communicating with the god of death. Andy was hesitant about their request. Now the demon can control his body at any time and could hurt everyone. Moved by Abby's sincerity, Andy reluctantly agreed. When they arrived at the jewelry store, Jenny knew her way around and opened the secret room. The store owner, who had narrowly escaped, told them that the Hessian mercenaries had just been there and gave Jenny a box. The stolen item was the Celestis dish, which was rumored to break curse magic. It's now clear that the Hessian mercenaries must want to use it to save the Headless Horseman. They would likely try to destroy the power plant next and extinguish the ultraviolet lights that were used to weaken the Horseman. Andy went with Crane to the secret room where the Horseman was held. When they opened the door, the Horseman, covered in chains, looked terrifying. The wizard Andy was tied to a chair and began to chant a spell. When the Headless Horseman showed no reaction, Crane provoked him. He accidentally picked up a necklace that had fallen from the Horseman, recognizing it as his wife Katrina's. The Headless Horseman started speaking through Andy. Crane told Abby the story of the necklace. It turns out the necklace originally belonged to his good friend Brunt, who was Katrina's first fiancé. Katrina called off the engagement due to Crane. Hearing about Crane's dark history, Abby showed a look of disgust. Seeing that the topic was getting off track, Abby reminded Crane that their priority was to find the Horseman's weakness. At the power plant, the inspector, along with Jenny, successfully apprehended the Hessian mercenaries gathered there. The interrogation in the dungeon is still underway. The Death Rider, or the Headless Horseman, seems to harbor a deep grudge against Crane. Destroying the Freemasons was never his primary objective. Killing Crane is the ultimate goal. After Crane's demise, the real apocalypse will ensue. Even though all the Hessian mercenaries present were captured, the power plant was still bombed and damaged. The ultraviolet lights in the dungeon went out, and it will take 2 hours for power to be restored. In this time, the Horseman's power will rapidly regenerate. While Abby trusts Crane implicitly, she is curious about the truth of the Horseman's claim that Crane once killed his good friend, Brunt. Crane revealed that on the day after the banquet, they were assigned to a secret mission to escort the resolution of the First Continental Congress, the precursor to the Declaration of Independence, making it very crucial. Upon discovering that his fiancée had fallen into the arms of his friend, Brunt challenged Crane to a duel. During the duel, Brunt was shot, and a large number of British soldiers arrived. To complete the mission, Crane had no choice but to leave his severely injured friend behind and escape alone. At the moment, the inspector and Jenny hurried over. Even after thoroughly searching the Hessian mercenaries' residence, they couldn't find the Celestis dish. Fortunately, to break the curse, one must enter the dungeon, so they decided to do their utmost to defend the last line. As everyone was preparing diligently, Andy quietly pulled out the Celestis dish from within himself. It seems that his previous disappearance was to deal with this matter. The inspector decided to go outside first, placing a troop at every intersection in the tunnel to prevent enemy entry. At Crane's insistence, only he was left to guard the dungeon. As the spell was recited, the skull on the bronze dish began to move, and strange noises came from the tunnel. Abby and the other two encountered humanoid creatures with compass symbols on their chests. They could only fight back with the firearms they held. Crane walked into the dungeon and saw the compass in Andy's hand. At the same time, the Horseman's power had already been restored. He broke the iron chains and started fighting with Crane. During muscle wrestling and the sword fight, Crane realized that the Horseman was using his friend Brunt's fighting techniques. The Horseman's words cleared his doubts. It turned out that Brunt was not killed at the duel. The demon Moloch found him and struck a deal with the angry Brunt. For revenge, Brunt put on a mask, branded himself, and turned into the Headless Horseman, continuing his existence in the world of the living. This is why the Horseman accused Crane of killing his friend. Just when the Horseman was about to kill Crane, Andy intervened, shouting that the master didn't want him to do this. Immediately afterward, the compass monster appeared and teleported them out of the dungeon. After the incident, Abby analyzed that Katrina was imprisoned entirely due to the personal feelings of Brunt-turned-Horseman. Conversely, Katrina is very likely the Horseman's weakness. Now they need the help of Crane's wife more than ever in order to prevent the apocalypse at this stage. The scene then shifts to a luxury car arriving at a desolate mansion. It's Lena's journey to trace her ancestry. She's the direct descendant of the former mansion owners. Despite her bodyguard's advice, Lena runs into the house alone. Upon opening a door, she finds a dense tangle of vines. Trying to push them aside, she's surprised by their sharpness. Before she has time to comprehend how her right hand got cut, her left hand is entwined. On the ground, several snake-like vines begin to slowly slither towards her. Back at the police station, Crane is distressed by the lack of familial company. The inspector informs them of Lena's disappearance. As she's a renowned philanthropist in the area, the senator hopes to ascertain her whereabouts as soon as possible. The task is assigned to Crane and Abby because Lena's personal notes mentioned Katrina's name. Upon investigating, they discover that Lena's ancestor was a large landowner during the war and one of the founders of the Continental Congress, as well as a good friend of Crane's. Following the clues provided by the police, they arrive at the mansion. Crane is shocked by its decay, with no signs of his and Katrina's visits. Inside the house, they find the bodyguard's corpse seated on a sofa. The fresh bloodstains suggest that Lena might still be alive. Abby tries to contact the police, but there's no signal. When they attempt to leave, all doors, windows, and exits close on their own. Now, isolated and without support, they must face the potentially haunted old mansion. They then see a woman in an antique dress walk by in the distance. Abby chases after her, but she disappears. Crane dismisses it as a hallucination due to extreme fear, but his attempt to comfort Abby just earns him a scornful look. Crane finds a copy of Gulliver's Travels on the floor, his wife's favorite book. A handwritten note inside shows that the book belonged to Katrina, indicating that she visited this place alone after Crane's death. During the war, this place was a haven. It not only protected black slaves, but perhaps also sheltered refugees threatened by supernatural forces. They open a tightly closed room, only to find Lena trapped by the vines. Together, they manage to rescue her. Crane is surprised to find that the severed vines are bleeding. At this moment in the courtyard, a humanoid figure composed of plants slowly rises and strides towards the house. The rescued Lena is unstable emotionally, crying out that it won't let them leave. She even bumps into the muzzle of a gun. Crane and Abby try to calm her. Crane tells Lena that her ancestor was an ally who shared their great noble ideals, one of the bravest people he has ever met. Abby suggests that they should retreat from here in one piece to honor his heroic spirit. These words leave Lena bewildered. Lena learns her ancestor was involved with witchcraft, which explains why Katrina had private contact with Lena's ancestor. Crane believes that there must be clues in Lena's notes on how to eliminate the monster attacking the house and save Katrina. But their immediate need is to survive, and they must rely on their own strength to break out. To avoid the looming threat, the trio hides in the cavity between the walls, but the house seems alive. In the dim environment, Abby quickly gets separated. Crane kicks open the wall and he and Lena return to the room. When he turns around to pull Abby, who he thought was behind him, the tree monster bursts out. The two flee for their shitty lives and crawl out of the wall. Abby once again sees the woman in an antique dress who seems to be talking to herself, completely ignoring Abby. The surrounding environment suddenly changes, and Abby once again enters an illusion, seeing Katrina give birth to Crane's son in this room. When she sees Crane again, Abby tells him everything she saw in the illusion. Lena's ancestor was indeed a wizard, which is why Katrina chose to give birth here. But the monster in the house attacked as soon as the child was born. The ancestor let Katrina and the baby leave first, and he was killed while resisting the monster. Though Crane doesn't know why his wife kept her pregnancy a secret, he prays that their son escaped successfully. When the two return to the basement, they find that the tree monster has already arrived and captured Lena. Remembering that blood flows out when the vines are broken, Crane instructs Abby to shoot at the densely packed roots around them. The tree monster is hurt and releases Lena, but the basement is sealed off and they are still trapped inside, unable to escape. At the critical moment, Abby again sees the scene where the antique-dressed woman covers for Katrina and her child to leave. The three of them escape through a secret passage. As soon as he escapes, a furious Crane picks up an axe, ready to return to the house alone. He vows to make the monster that wanted to harm his wife and child pay the price. Back to the basement, Crane madly chops at the surrounding roots. The tree monster suffers heavy damage and is finally killed by Crane. Under the full moon, the three retreat unscathed. They return to the archives where the pair begin to sort through the information Lena had sent. They discover that the antique-dressed woman Abby saw was their own ancestor. It seems that her fate and Crane's had been intertwined long ago. Over at Jenny's, who usually keeps to herself, she surprisingly invites the inspector to share Christmas Eve dinner, hinting at some fondness. Meanwhile, the inspector's ex-wife arrives in Sleepy Hollow with their daughter, urging him to fulfill his paternal responsibilities. On the other side, Crane is very distressed to learn that he has a son. His wife's deliberate concealment leaves him full of doubts. All of this may fall on the war against the demon Moloch. In order to uncover the truth, he specifically calls on the Sin Eater, Henry, for help, hoping to contact his wife, Katrina, through him. Although Henry agrees to do his best, Purgatory is fraught with danger, and Crane may be in mortal danger. Seeing that the two are determined, Henry begins his spell. In the illusion, Crane comes to a church where he sees a baby carriage, a doll, and his wife. Katrina named their child Jeremy. It's revealed that she was punished by the witches for secretly hiding Crane's body. When she fled to Europe to find a spell to break the bond between her husband and the Headless Horseman, she discovered that she was pregnant. To avoid being pursued, she specifically went to Lena's ancestors' estate to give birth. As a mother, she didn't want her son to be harmed, and soon gave him to a couple to raise. This church is the image of that time. Facing this all the time, the saddest choice is Purgatory's punishment for people. Just learning that his wife was trapped to death by the witches, the door was suddenly smashed open by a giant. Crane returns to reality and tells Abby that her ancestors were the ones who raised his son. In the forest, a faceless monster crawls out from the ground to flex its handsome face. Abby suggests going to the Historical Society Museum to find clues. There, they store rare documents that can be traced back to the time of the Revolutionary War. The sorrowful Henry is ready to leave, but Abby, who is good at communicating, convinces him to come along. Not far away, the faceless monster silently observes everything that is happening. Upon reaching the museum, the logs reveal that Jeremy's foster parents died in a fire not long after they started raising him. The locals were terrified of this child, as it was rumored that his cries could spark flames, an ability apparently inherited from his mother. Over time, people began to believe that the child was a monster and sent him to a wartime orphanage, but the logs do not mention what happened afterward. Seeing that Henry has no intention of helping, Abby starts to taunt him. In his defense, Henry tells them that the museum curator hadn't divulged all that he knew. Crane rushes to the office, only to find the curator gone. They follow the trail outside and find the curator's car severely damaged and the curator dead at the scene. Subsequently, they retrieve the curator's personal items from the evidence room. Henry senses pain emanating from one of the boxes, which bears the emblem of the coven, indicating that the curator was also a witch. Inside the box is a small notebook filled with expressions of anger, pain, and death. Among the drawings, Abby and Crane recognize a doll they had seen in their visions. Henry, sensing the memories attached to it, reveals that the priest who used to run the orphanage was a man with a dark heart. He believed that the only way to cleanse Jeremy of his suffering was through flagellation. One day, the child's pain evoked his mother's promise to protect her offspring. A drop of blood fell, and the doll transformed into a faceless monster to guard Jeremy. Crane recalls the monster he saw in Purgatory, realizing that he inadvertently brought it into this world upon his return. The curator's murder was the son's way of punishing those who had once hurt him. If any other members of the coven are still alive, this murder is just the beginning of a revenge spree. Since they found no useful information in the curator's personal belongings, Crane thinks of Washington's Bible, which contains information about golems. According to legend, they are made of clay and possess immense destructive power. Katrina once mentioned that a guardian would protect Crane in the war against the demons. It seems that the golem is the transformation of Jeremy's doll. Looking at the drawing on the paper, Abby feels a sense of déjà vu. It's the 4 witches she saw when she first encountered Katrina in a vision. Crane thinks that if they were able to trap Katrina in Purgatory, they should also have the power to bring her back, which would be a powerful blow to the demon Moloch. They must find these 4 people before the golem does. Based on a ticket stub, Henry believes that they could be hiding in an amusement park. Upon arriving at the amusement park, Crane enters a tent. The witches openly acknowledge their role in trapping Katrina, but are instantly intimidated when they learn that the golem followed Crane back from Purgatory. They explain that the pain Crane and his family are experiencing is due to their actions violating nature. As the witches' mission is to uphold justice, they feel responsible for rectifying Katrina's mistake. Back in the day, terrifying rumors about Jeremy and the golem spread, which led to their persecution. Unintentionally, the golem had to kill to protect its master. Aware of Jeremy's talents and abilities, they initially wanted to invite him to join the coven. However, out of resentment, Jeremy did not agree. His power was too immense, so the witches had to join forces to stop his heart and bury him deep underground. When the golem shows up, Crane learns from the witches about the method to destroy it, using Jeremy's blood. To avoid an attack, Crane gets injured by a shard of glass. Henry analyzes that since Jeremy's blood is the key, Crane, as his father, should have the same effect with his blood. As Abby is about to be harmed, Crane steps up. He knows that the golem has long considered Jeremy its own child, and despite Jeremy's death, it still can't let go of its attachment to him. Crane tries to reason with it, but the wrath accumulated over centuries isn't something that can be dissipated with a few words. Having no choice, Crane has to strike. After a fierce battle, the golem is defeated, lays down its obsession, and returns to dust. Back at the police station, Crane is sucked into a mirror where Moloch appears, stating that Abby's soul cannot escape his clutches. Meanwhile, the inspector is filled with guilt. He has spent his life fighting crime, yet his daughter was paralyzed in a car accident, which starts to shake his faith when he felt God had not treated him fairly. Even when he takes his daughter to the park for a distraction, they are threatened by a malevolent spirit possessing a barbecue guy. It seems the dark forces have started targeting him. The scene shifts to the lake cabin where Abby finally convinces Crane to shed his old military uniform and adopt a more modern, stylish look. Honestly, it was quite painful to watch him in those tight jeans, which he joked must be a sign of the apocalypse. However, the casual attire did seem more appealing. Despite their eagerness to understand Moloch's purpose, they had no leads in the past few days. Before they could finish discussing this, Crane quickly returned to his centuries-old, unwashed costume. Back at the police station, the possessed barbecue guy who threatened the inspector's daughter is being interrogated. His memory of that time is a complete blank. Although the lie detector indicates he's not lying, the inspector is certain he heard something. Thinking of the woman the guy bumped into, the inspector orders Luke to find her as quickly as possible. However, he doesn't know that the woman has already come to the police station, and the evil spirit has transferred to a chubby officer. Returning to his office, the inspector receives a phone call. The caller immediately asks how much he cares about his daughter. He checks the caller ID and realizes the caller is inside the police station. They demand Washington's Bible. After careful observation, he notices the chubby officer's cold eyes and instantly lunges at him. Unfortunately, the cunning spirit shifts to possess another officer. Distraught, the inspector seeks help from the priest, who says that an evil spirit can freely possess human souls and advises him to get his family to safety, promising to join him later. When the inspector finds Crane and Abby, he asks about Washington's Bible and why the evil spirit wants it. Crane is also puzzled. His wife only mentioned it contains secrets to defeat demons. Besides marking out the content about the witnesses, they haven't found anything different about the book. However, if the dark forces are seeking this book, there must be hidden secrets they haven't discovered. The inspector suggests they find a way to eliminate the evil spirit from the book as soon as possible. Abby finds information about possession from Officer Corbin's files. A disc records her partner's exorcism attempt. Surprisingly, the person in the video is Jenny, looking disheveled with her eyes rolled back. Soon after, they bring in Jenny to understand the situation, but she has no recollection. Abby theorizes that the evil spirit that once possessed Jenny has returned to acquire Washington's Bible. Crane disagrees with handing it over, stating that Washington was once a leader in the field of espionage, and they just haven't deciphered the information in the book. To protect the inspector's daughter, they must take action quickly. First and foremost, they need to comprehend what kind of evil spirit they're dealing with. So Abby plays the video of Corbin's exorcism on Jenny for her. In the video, a man's voice emanates from Jenny's mouth. The demon claims that Jenny has been marked. Corbin brandishes a cross, but the demon doesn't seem to care, continually threatening to kill Abby. After saying this, it lunges at Corbin, and then their figures vanish from the screen. Jenny becomes agitated and admits that she never mentioned this incident because the evil spirit had been exorcised by Corbin. As to how he accomplished it, she has no idea. Meanwhile, the inspector takes his wife and daughter to a secluded cabin in the woods for safety. Coincidentally, the currently possessed officer is among those assigned to guard them. Crane finds Jenny and tries to calm her down. It's late in the evening and the sun is about to set. Once night falls, the demon will come out. Even though she can't remember what happened, Jenny is terrified. She talks about her possession experience, explaining that even after the spirit left, she often heard voices in her head telling her to kill her sister. In order to control herself, she had no choice but to commit crimes, and this is how she ended up in jail. Although the disc doesn't contain any methods to restrain the demon, Jenny did have contact with it. Crane asks her for help. Seeing the inspector bring a priest to the cabin, the supposedly possessed officer is confused, especially when he sees salt scattered at the entrance. He nonchalantly sweeps it away, and then Officer Luke suddenly attacks him. It seems the evil spirit has transferred, and Luke enters the cabin without hesitation. Back in the archive room, Crane notes the salt in the video. However, salt can only restrict a demon, not expel it. He believes that Corbin must have used another method, and the clue could be hidden in the words the demon spoke. Abby captures and plays the audio backward. Crane recognizes it as ancient Aramaic. It turns out the demon is a high-level evil spirit that can transfer from one body to another through physical contact. It's said to be a leader in Moloch's evil army and was once defeated by medieval French nuns who used lanterns in front of the church. Crane recalls a few of these lanterns were gifted to Benjamin Franklin, and Jenny happens to know where they might be. At the cabin in the woods, the inspector and his ex-wife step outside to talk. Suddenly, they receive a call from Luke. They rush back into the cabin to find their daughter levitating in midair, with her hair in disarray and her eyes rolled back, looking very similar to Jenny when she was possessed. Meanwhile, Jenny and the others are driving to retrieve the lanterns. These people are all fanatical doomsday believers. Although they are friends, they don't mind shooting anyone who tries to take their possessions. Over at the inspector's, the evil spirit is enjoying itself immensely, not only hopping around, but also twisting the priest's head as if it's a pretzel. Watching his daughter's body being tortured, the inspector is heartbroken, but still doesn't want to give up the Bible. Seeing this, the demon takes his ex-wife hostage, leaving the inspector with a difficult decision. In the car, Abby receives a call from the inspector. She initially thinks he's asking for the Bible, but instead he orders them not to get involved. The group realizes he has prepared for the worst. Upon reaching Jenny's friend's house, Abby and her sister take the opportunity to stage a lock-picking competition. Once in the storage room, Crane is immediately distracted by the collected treasures, forgetting the task at hand. Abby scolds him reasonably. After retrieving the lantern, they quickly retreat, but as soon as they exit the door, they are surrounded at gunpoint. Thanks to Jenny's outside support, the trio manages to escape safely. On the other side, the inspector arrives at the archive room with his wife and daughter, ostensibly to find the Bible, but actually to buy some time. In conversation with the demon, it suddenly occurs to him that after possession, his daughter's consciousness has moments of clarity. So the couple starts trying to awaken their daughter's soul. The evil spirit, infuriated, begins to attack them. Jenny arrives, and seeing the body vessel it once possessed, the evil spirit cannot help but make a few remarks. Abby enrages the evil spirit to divert its attention, buying time for Crane to cut off its escape route. After the encirclement is complete, Crane brings out the lantern. Under the light of the lantern, the evil spirit is quickly absorbed and trapped into the lamp. Perhaps influenced by the inspector's family, Abby hugs her sister for the first time. Back at the cabin, Crane identifies that the pages of the Bible have been smeared with invisible ink. After applying a reagent, the secrets hidden in the book finally begin to appear. Crane recognizes that the writing is indeed by Washington himself. However, the date of signing is 4 days after the recorded date of his death. It appears there are more secrets for them to uncover. The scene shifts to Abby calling Crane about Washington's Bible. To confirm the authenticity of Washington's notes in the Bible, she sends the pages for carbon dating. Now she just waits for the results. Hanging up the phone, she suddenly turns around to find Andy quietly breaking into her place. Abby knows that nothing good comes from Nightcat's visits. At this moment, Crane is carefully examining Washington's notes in the Bible. December 18th, 1799, this date must have a special meaning. During the war, Crane was summoned to see Washington. While assigning tasks for him, Washington mentioned that Lazarus will rise from the grave. Perhaps this Lazarus is the key to the mystery. Looking through the book of John for references to the resurrection of the dead, Crane finally finds a clue. Andy tells Abby that Demon Moloch wants the map. The method to find the map is recorded in Washington's Bible. He persuades Abby to hand over the Bible. Then he makes all sorts of promises about official positions. Seeing that Abby wants to call Crane, Andy says the prophecy shows that Crane will offer her soul to Moloch. He then declares his love, roughly saying that others are just playing games with her, only he truly cares for her, and a good man shouldn't be missed. The air suddenly falls silent. Seeing that Abby is about to speak her mind, Andy quickly says he doesn't want to hear it. While Abby makes a call, Andy dislocates his joints, removes the handcuffs, and sneaks away. Upon meeting Abby, Crane poured out his grievances, calling his own phone an outdated piece of junk. He complimented Abby's new phone and believed that it would make future communication much smoother. In a gentlemanly fashion, he teased his partner. Abby revealed that what Moloch wanted was a map. Seeing the hesitation on her face, Crane guessed that Abby had started to believe Moloch's claim that he would betray her and offer her soul. He told Abby about his discovery earlier in the day. Apparently, the biblical account of Lazarus typically contains 57 verses, but Washington's Bible has 67. He was certain that the extra 10 verses concealed a mystery. Upon applying a chemical reagent to the additional pages, a large block of text appeared. It was a directive from Washington himself to Crane, dated December 18, 1799. It roughly meant that if this message was being read, it would mean that the war had begun and Crane's role as a witness would officially commence. It turns out that on the 14th, the doctor diagnosed Washington's death as imminent, so he devised a plan, stating in his will that his body should be well preserved. In this way, supernatural forces might be able to help him complete his final mission. On the 18th, the wizards resurrected Washington. After his resurrection, he existed between life and death, able to convey information from one world to another. It was during this time that a map was drawn for Crane, showing the passage between the mortal world and purgatory. Crane immediately thought that if he could find the map, he could rescue his wife. The priority was for the duo to get the map before Moloch. Abby agreed to temporarily put aside her reservations and focus on the search. The records showed that among the wizards who participated in the resurrection ceremony was a priest named Alfred, who had been killed in the first episode. It seemed that the sorcerer and witch groups had formed an alliance long ago. Alfred's duty was to stay in Sleepy Hollow, guarding the skulls of the Death Riders. He had been doing this for 2 centuries. The prayer beads that appeared in the resurrection ceremony must have been Alfred's. Sorcerers were known for using dark forces to extract magical tools. Those beads were undoubtedly filled with evil. If they could obtain them, the Sin-Eater Henry might be able to sense the location of the map. Inside the police station, the inspector was under investigation. The continuous strange murders in the town finally attracted the attention of the higher-ups. They believed that these cases were likely related to some detective. The inspector adamantly denied this, saying that all of this was the work of demons. In the underground tunnel, Andy was summoned by Moloch again. Hearing Moloch's merciless taunting, he became furious. Due to his romantic frustrations, Andy decided to devote himself to destroying the world. As soon as Moloch's voice disappeared, countless insects flew in from all directions. They spat out countless silk threads, quickly wrapping Andy into a large bundle. In the cemetery, Crane met up with the arriving Henry, and together with Abby, they unearthed the priest's coffin. The priest had requested to be buried with his prayer beads and his body intact. The The group noticed that the body appeared lifelike. Crane explained that not decomposing after death was a special ability of sorcerers. Henry touched the beads and found that they were indeed supernatural relics. Upon touching them again, he was burnt. Clearly, someone had placed a protective spell on them to prevent anyone from discovering the truth. Although Abby thought they should stop there, Henry believed the matter to be of great importance and continued to sense, bearing the pain. He discovered that Washington had indeed been reborn, and Alfred had once transported mysterious goods along the riverbank. Abby, however, was hesitant. Over 200 years had passed, and she was worried that even if they found the map and rescued Crane's wife Katrina, things might not go as they expected. If they entered purgatory, it would mean opening the gates to hell. Once the demons were released, the end of the world would come early. Their duty should be to protect everyone, not just to risk everything to save Katrina. Meanwhile, Henry, with his eyes closed, healed his injury. The wound was visibly healing at a remarkable speed. Not far away, a figure swiftly darted by. Several creatures appeared, their bodies cloaked in darkness and their movements exceptionally agile. Fortunately, bullets could harm them, and very soon all the creatures were eliminated. It seemed that the mysterious map was much more important than they had initially thought. The pressing matter at hand was to locate it as quickly as possible. Henry speculated that Alfred must have taken the clues to the map into the tomb. This reminded Crane of a tradition among the Freemasons, who would bury their most important secrets with their bodies. So Abby began searching for Washington's burial site, but the records pointed to 3 different tombs. Crane believed that Washington would have wanted to be buried near Sleepy Hollow to facilitate Alfred's guardianship. Looking back, what Alfred had secretly transported was likely Washington's body. There are 21 islands along the Hudson River. Finding the body would mean finding the map. In the underground tunnel, a reborn Andy emerged from his cocoon, his appearance drastically altered. With a head like E.T. and fists that could easily shatter brick walls, he rallied himself, ready for a big fight. Crane and his 2 companions took a boat to Poughkeepsie Island. In ancient times, it was used to exile criminals and was generally avoided by ordinary people, making it an ideal place to hide Washington's body. On landing the island, Abby suggested that they first decide how to handle the map after finding it. She likened the map to a nuclear bomb. It should be handled with extreme caution, as any mishap could potentially bring about the end of the world prematurely. On the way, Abby asked Henry about any prophecies involving the dissolution of the 2 witnesses. Henry mentioned a deleted covenant in the Bible, which stated that if a monster were to appear in the world, one witness would betray the other witness, or both would struggle to survive. This worried Abby, who was concerned that Crane might betray her, in fear that what demon Moloch said before would come true. However, Henry believed that since that part was deleted, its authenticity was questionable. All they could do was not let it come true. Crane discovered a solitary stone which he recognized as a symbol of the Freemasons. Together they moved it, revealing a stone staircase leading underground. Inside the tomb there was a small pyramid in the center. Abby was about to move the clearly visible trap, but Crane stopped her. His years in the military and his understanding of Washington told him that the pyramid was a trap, which could potentially cause the entire tomb to collapse. Surveying their surroundings, they noticed a wall of the tomb carved with the image of a Roman general, a figure greatly admired by Washington. The image represented the idea that power should only be given to those who least desire it. Upon inspecting the carving, Crane discovered a groove the same size as his ring. He removed his ring and inserted it into the depression. As expected, a hidden chamber revealed itself behind the wall, and there lay the real sarcophagus. Upon opening the sarcophagus, they found a map placed on the body within. Crane was overjoyed, murmuring that he could finally rescue his wife. Abby, however, was mixed with emotions. Before they could study the map further, the mutated Andy attacked them. His ferocity was clear as day. Abby drew her gun and fired, but Andy, in his current state, easily dodged the bullets and even bent the gun with one hand. He grasped Abby's neck tightly. Failing to overpower him, Abby tried to appeal to his emotions. Seeing Andy unmoved, Henry rushed over, only grabbing Andy's arm. Memories of past experiences flashed before his eyes. No wonder this old man always kept others at a distance. He had the ability to unearth people's deepest secrets. Shaking off Henry, Andy regained control over his body. He pleaded with Abby to destroy the map, as Moloch needed it to win the war. He even asked Abby to kill him. Urged by Henry, Abby thrust a pry bar through Andy's head. The exit was destroyed by Andy, and the three had to find another way out. Crane found the Freemasons' symbol for ascension in the inner chamber, indicating a back door. However, before they could move the mechanism, Andy stood up again. Remembering the pyramid could cause the tomb to collapse, Abby decisively fired her gun, hitting the lever. The tomb began to collapse, burying Andy beneath the rubble, but they managed to escape through the secret passage. Abby reminded Crane of Andy's warning about the map and left it up to him to decide whether to destroy it. Despite some hesitation, Crane chose to burn the map. Seeing that Crane had not betrayed her trust, Abby solemnly promised that they would rescue Katrina. However, upon returning to the cabin and thinking of his wife suffering in purgatory, Crane decided to use his photographic memory to recreate the map. On the other side, in order to protect his daughter, the inspector confessed to the investigative team that he had murdered the priest. The scene then shifts to Henry having a dream where he encounters a terrifying scene. During the solar eclipse, Moloch appears. The forest awakens another horseman from his underground slumber. He wields a flaming longsword, his body a void, appearing as a terrifying suit of armor charging into battle. At the moment, Crane, lost in thought by the river, sees his wife in the distance and rushes towards her, only to find himself in an old military camp. After a moment of mistaken identity, the woman informs him that they are near Lake Champlain, having just finished a military operation. Overjoyed, Crane realizes he must be dreaming, for this event predates the American Revolutionary War. Suddenly, a call brings Crane back to reality. All of this was just a historical reenactment. Henry calls urgently, saying the matter is of utmost importance and that he needs to see Crane and Abby as soon as possible. As they wait for Henry to arrive at the Trout Lake cabin, Abby informs everyone that the inspector has been arrested for the murder of the priest. They hope to pool their resources to rescue him. Crane insists that the justice system will reveal the truth, but Jenny retorts that telling the truth landed her in a mental hospital for 10 years. After that, Henry arrives in a hurry, stating that Moloch will turn the earth into a living hell today. He has already seen the premonitions in his dream where Moloch, surrounded by 4 white trees, revived a terrifying creature with no visible face, but a claw covered in mud that looks menacing. After mentioning a flaming horse sword and a solar eclipse, everyone immediately deduces that it must be the War Rider, one of the 4 apocalyptic horsemen. According to the astronomical calendar, there will be a solar eclipse before sunset tonight, exactly 13 years from the day when Abby and Jenny first encountered Moloch. Today, the Sleepy Hollow will be ravaged by the War Rider. Back at the police station, Abby learns that the inspector has been transferred to the state court. Before leaving, he left behind a notebook. In the archives, Crane finds in the Bible that if a binding spell is cast on the land where the War Rider appears, it will prevent him from leaving. However, most of the witches they've met are dead, largely due to their own actions. This puts them in an awkward position. When the conversation turns to Katrina, Crane gets very uncomfortable. He stammers out thanks to his extraordinary memory, he was able to redraw a map. Abby was shocked upon knowing that she had been played. After a few lame excuses, Crane started to show off, saying that she must be starting to appreciate him. The map indicates some trails, all of which converge in the Sleepy Hollow forest. According to Washington's Bible, if Washington's words are carefully analyzed, it can be seen that these muddy paths are bridges connecting the 2 worlds. The entrance to purgatory should be where they intersect. As for the name of the saint in Moloch's riddle, the inspector also gave a hint. In his notebook, he recorded his meeting with Father Alfred, indicating that finding the recorded memo could decrypt it. Although Jenny worries that saving Katrina will release Moloch, Abby's determination is set. She chooses to no longer run away but to face the most terrifying nightmare in her heart. Warm words finally melt the ice that has been blocking the sisters for many years. Crane, Abby, and Henry rush to the location marked on the map. Other than Henry, both are embracing the idea of experiencing life after death, feeling quite joyful and lighthearted. Henry can't stand their buoyant attitude and warns them that purgatory is a maze full of temptations, where people can easily fall into debauchery, especially after consuming the food or drink within. Once done, they would be irredeemable, forever trapped. He advises them to remember a spell that will allow them to return, reminding them this journey is fraught with danger. The 2 recite the spell, and a tunnel appears in the void before them, cracking open like a crystal. Without a backward glance, they step forward. The next second, Abby wakes up on a comfortable bed in the cabin by Trout Lake. The appearance of her deceased partner, Corbin and Andy, confuses Abby, who is eager to know where Crane is. To her surprise, the kind-hearted Corbin helps her sit down, explaining that she experienced hallucinations and dizziness due to a head injury during a combat simulation. He even mentions that she is already an honor student in the FBI training program. The life she longed for seems to be unfolding before her eyes. Meanwhile, Crane returns to his teaching position at Oxford University. As a hero who has reversed the tide of war multiple times, he has won the respect of everyone, including his father. This is a significant change, considering that his father once threatened to disown him for siding with Washington. Fortunately, when seeing the delicious food and wine, they both remember Henry's warning and resist the temptation at the last moment. Everything in front of them starts to collapse rapidly. Jenny listens to Corbin's recordings one by one. In a conversation with Father Alfred, they mention a body they once found with a strange tattoo on the back of its head. This clue leads Corbin's attention to an abandoned church that has been deserted for 100 years. He believes the answer is hidden there. In Purgatory, Crane, who has shaken off the illusion, sees a faceless girl sitting not far away. The atmosphere is incredibly eerie. He finds Abby unconscious, and they confirm their identities by asking each other questions. Crane realizes this is the first time he's seeing the forest where Katrina is. During their search, they encounter various lost souls aimlessly wandering the dim land. When they reach the church and meet Katrina, they tell her that the War Rider is about to descend into the world and that her spell is needed to prevent him from coming. Katrina explains that this kind of smuggling would break the boundary between the two realms. The only way for her to leave is for another soul to take her place. Abby bravely volunteers to stay, but Crane strongly opposes this. Besides their friendship, he worries that if Abby stays, it would fulfill the prophecy that Moloch will eventually get her soul. With no time to hesitate, Katrina puts a necklace that protects the wearer from Moloch on Abby and promises to return here to call back Abby after stopping the War Rider. Demon Moloch is already approaching outside the window. Both Crane and his wife begin to recite the returning spell, and the tunnel appears again. Crane returns to the earthly realm. Despite his deep concern for Abby's safety, he is slightly relieved, knowing that the necklace will prevent Moloch from approaching her. After meeting up with Katrina, the trio rush to the location where the War Rider is expected to appear. At this point, Jenny has arrived at the church that Corbin had mentioned. Strangely, all historical records about this place have mysteriously vanished. Just as she began to despair, she found the church's sign buried under a thick layer of fallen leaves. Unaware that Abby has stayed behind in Purgatory, Jenny immediately calls her sister. While rushing to meet up, she encounters the Headless Horseman, and her car is overturned by a single blow from him. Upon seeing 4 white trees, Henry believes they have reached their destination. However, at the location mentioned by Henry, Katrina does not sense any dark forces. She disappointingly concludes that the War Rider must have left. Unexpectedly, Henry calmly states that the apocalypse is now upon them. He then proceeds to nail both of them to the trees. As it turns out, the so-called omen was just part of his plan. As a sinner, Henry knew that faith is humanity's weakness. He merely planted a seed of hope in Katrina's heart and then played his part. His plans have unfolded just as he had envisioned. He had always wondered why he was granted powers from above. It wasn't until Crane's appearance that he found his answer. In reality, even if Katrina recites the binding spell, it would have no effect because the War Rider had left more than 10 years ago. 13 years ago, on the same day of a total solar eclipse, Moloch himself awakened him from underground. Like the Headless Horseman before him, he was once a mortal. Now, he is only half human. This flesh and blood body is the product of Crane and Katrina's love. It turns out Henry is actually their son Jeremy, who was abandoned in a coffin to fend for himself. However, the power of the wizard's blood kept him constantly reborn. After experiencing life after rebirth, he realized that death was the real liberation. For 2 full centuries, he was trapped underground, feeding on surrounding vines. He harbors immense resentment towards Crane and Katrina for bestowing him with eternal life only to abandon him. He now believes that Moloch, who gave him his freedom, is his true father and will do everything in his power to help him achieve his goal. The Headless Horseman arrives, handing Henry a small package before leaving with Katrina on horseback. Crane, on the other hand, is thrown by Henry into the same tomb that once buried him. Inside the package is a badge that represents the power of the War Rider. By lightly breaking it open, Henry officially becomes the War Horseman. The coffin is closed over Crane's desperate screams. With that, Season 1 of this drama concludes. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.